All right. Well, good evening to everyone who's here. For those of you who will watch this soon after, hello to everyone. A few announcements. For starters, I want to give a very big, warm, thankful hello to everyone that's on Patreon. To everyone that's on Patreon and to everyone that's on the YouTube members channel. Um, without what the support that you guys have given us, we would not be able to do this at all. So, you know, I'm not the greatest tech savvy guy in the world, so I don't put a lot on Patreon. I literally put everything out on YouTube. That way everyone can see it, what it is that I do. But for those who are on Patreon and for the members channel, I'm working on the Record Chronicles still. The second episode has been recorded. I am now editing. I should be finished editing by at least tomorrow, and then it'll be loaded onto Patreon, and then it'll be loaded onto also on the members channel. So if you do happen to like the Records Chronicle stories, you do want to listen to them, you can find them at the Patreon channel, or you can find them over on the members channel. But yeah, to those who donate, God bless you guys so much. We don't ask for donations. We don't have our hands stuck out. So, if God puts it on your heart to donate to what we're doing, um, praise the Lord, He still wants me doing this. But thank you very much for all of you who have sent your donations, your cards. We do our best to keep all of the cards. We're trying to answer every card too. So thank you very much for those of you who write to us, who email us all the time, who are on the American Vindicta Show Discord community. You know, love you guys. Thank you very much for all your support. We do have training coming up. I have to make that announcement. June 28th and through the 30th. So June 28th, 29th, 30th at Tellico Plains, Tennessee, we have our 3-day shoot, move, communicate course. Same thing. We'll have the same course July 26th, 27th, 28th at Tellico Plains. That's a lot of really fun time. I'm still currently editing a lot of the video from the last two training days that we did here in Texas. We had a lot of fun, had a lot of training done, some hot days. And so yeah, I'm trying to get all that squared away so that it looks somewhat nice. And then I'll be posting that. I know a lot of people like to watch the type of training that we're doing. It's a lot of ways that you can sit there and learn stuff for free. But I'm telling you, what you're going to see in these videos is nothing like what you can learn while you're there, being instructed by us. So if you feel the need to want to be able to get better prepared, better trained, test your skills, test your gear, or if you're a veteran or if you're in law enforcement, you've already got all this training and you want to continue to sharpen the sword, then please come out and see us. VindictaSolutions.com, VINDICTA solutions.com. Our training sessions have been dropped from the $1,000 to $600. So, it's 3 12-hour days. Well, technically 2 12-hour days and then a half day. And so, we don't mess around. We start at 9. We go till dark every night. We train with lights on the first day. We try to teach you as much as possible. And we're refining a lot of the things that we're doing too, trying to make this run as much smoother than it was. So, that first day of training's the crawl phase, the evening's the walk phase, and then Saturday, which would be day 2, is a sprint for your life stage. So we just pretty much skip over run, and then we consolidate all that down into Sunday, and we just continue what you've learned. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of time, out there getting the foot movement down, getting the skills down, navigating these new tactics and techniques that we're trying to teach people. But we haven't had a complaint yet. We've had people from all walks of life come, and so far, I'm proud to say that between me and the other guys at Vindicta Solutions, we're doing our best to prepare the body of Christ the best way that we can. So, Jesus said to sell your cloak, buy a sword. We're the guys who's teaching you how to swing it. So if you have no idea what you're doing, please come see us. It's better to have some level of preparation than none. And even if not, you can still reach out to us through the Vindicta Solutions website and contact us about gear, contact us about training. We're here for you guys. So, all right, next, Jamie Walden. Tentatively, we are supposed to be having a training session at Jamie Walden's place, but it's not going to be the shoot, move, communicate course. It is going to be a family preparedness course. So it's more or less the same thing, 2 to 2.5 days worth. It's going to be mainly PowerPoint. We're going to be actually there teaching a lot of stuff about a various different amounts of things for family preparedness. So, it's a good challenge for us. We're stepping outside of the box on some of the things that we normally teach, and this will be way more applicable to the average person than those who want to come and do the actual physical training. So everyone can walk away from this next thing that we're going to be doing at Jamie's, with a lot of confidence. You can probably know a lot more than what you did before you came. For some of you guys who do know most of what we're going to be talking about, which is going to be very, very few of you. There's still a lot of refinement and a lot of new stuff that we're going to be teaching you, going to be showing you. So stay in tuned for that. That will be the end of August, tentatively. A lot of stuff's going on right now politically. Israel is invading Rafah in Palestine, and that's causing a whole lot of problems here in America. So, currently, one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to get people to be a little bit more cautious when they're out and about than what they normally are. And I say that because, yeah, the stuff going on with the colleges and the Black Lives Matter, Antifa riot stuff happening again. Yeah, it's a problem, but it's not the biggest problem in the world. The biggest problem that we are quietly watching is going to be from violent Islamic extremists, violent terrorists, or provocateurs, lone wolf attacks, active shooters, things like that. There was recently a video, and I'll be posting about this tomorrow. A video from a church where a man walked straight up to where the preacher was behind the pulpit. Actually, it was to the side of the pulpit, and pulled a gun out on the preacher, point blank range, and the gun misfired. Or God had his hand on the pistol. And so, it within seconds, the guy was tackled to the ground, and it was weird for a guy who wanted to try and kill somebody. He had zero concern or effort about unjamming the gun or doing anything else. So I thought that was kind of strange. You had thought he would have still tried to lunge at him, attack him. But yeah, that didn't happen. So that was very weird. But thankfully they were able to tackle the guy and wrestle the gun out of his hand, which that's extraordinarily dangerous, by the way, to even consider doing that. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about that. I'm going to be breaking that down. Look, the thing about it is that church security needs to really be ramped up in any times from now on. I mean, your Wednesday service, Saturday service, your Sunday service, whatever it is that your services are going on. For those of you who are in a church security group, if you want to reach out to our team, because we're currently going to be working with a church security group out of Corpus Christi. That's actually who we just ended up training part of them. If you want to reach out to us and talk with us about your training regimen or about what you got going on, please reach out. I've worked with a few churches now, and anything that we can do to help the body of Christ helps everybody. But not everybody gets it. Not everybody who is on the team needs to be on the team. The first big team that I worked with, the church brought me in to revamp and relook at everything. And I pretty much fired everybody. And we had almost a hiring. We literally had a board where it was myself and 3 or 4 others of the church, um, to include one of the deacons. And, we just more or less had people come up and ask us, why do you want to be on the church? What skills do you have? Do you know medical? Do you know how to use your firearm? These are the most important things that you're going to be messing with. And it was just strange how many people had very little skill, very little idea, but they had been on the church security team. Look, I'm going to say this, and Jamie Walden says the same thing. Just because you carry a gun does not mean you need to be part of the church security team. Just because you can carry a gun does not mean you know what you're doing. Um, it's I think it's one of these things where it's getting to the point where we men, we need to be able to humble ourselves and bite our tongue and say, look, the security thing is not me. That's not who I am. I don't have the skills to do that. And someone else needs to take over. Likewise, if your church security team is mainly guys in their 60s to 70s, you are so wrong. You are so freaking wrong. Look, I know some guys that are in their 60s that are pretty squared away, but that does not compare to men in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Where are you, men? So, and for those of you who are on these security teams, how much are you training? Realistically, how much do you train? Do you train every week with everybody? Do you train once a month? Do you train once a year? Most likely, none of you are training enough. So, if you need someone to come in and evaluate and not to be everybody's buddy and hurt people's feelings, give us a call, because you're not helping anybody by being friendly with everybody. People need to understand that this is a very high risk, high reward kind of job that 99% of the time, nothing's ever going to happen. And 99% of that time, you're probably just going to have to talk to people or maybe escort people out of a church. But it's that 1%, that 1 in a million chance where you could have the active shooter, you could have a mass casualty. That's what we're very prepared for, to teach people. That's what we're so worried about. We're seeing it happen all over the country. I don't know. I don't know, man. You're either going to take being a Christian serious and stop sinning, get your life right, do the right things, or you're not. Or you're going to take your security group serious, do the right things, get the right people, get them the right gear, and get them the right training, or you're not, and you're just going to wing it. And I hope God's with you as you wing everything. Anyways, I'll get off my high horse. If you can turn your books, your Bibles, go to Psalm 10. Should have your book in your lap at least. Psalm 10, a prayer for the overthrow of the wicked. Oh, Lord. Why do you stand so far away, O Lord? Why do you hide yourself, veiling your eyes in times of trouble? In pride and arrogance, the wicked hotly pursue and persecute the afflicted. Let them be caught in the plots which they have devised. For the wicked boast and sing the praises of his heart's desire, and the greedy man curses and spurns and even despises the Lord. The wicked in the haughtiness of his face will not seek nor inquire for him. All his thoughts are, there is no God, so there is no accountability or punishment. His ways prosper at all times. Your judgments, Lord, are on high. Out of his sight, so he never thinks about them. As for all his enemies, he sneers at them. He says to himself, I will not be moved, for throughout all generations I will not be in adversity, for nothing bad will happen to me. How many of you listen to your friends, your local leaders, your local pastors who live in this nothing bad will ever happen to me world? Plenty. His mouth is full of curses and deceit, fraud and oppression. Under his tongue is mischief and wickedness, the injustice and sin. He lurks in ambush in the villages, in hiding places. He kills the innocent. He lies in wait for the unfortunate, the unhappy, the poor, and the helpless. He lurks in a hiding place like a lion in his lair. He lies in wait to catch the afflicted. He catches the afflicted when he draws them into his net. He crushes his prey and crouches, and the unfortunate fall by his mighty claws. He says to himself, God has quite forgotten. He has hidden his face. He will never see my deed. Arise, O Lord. O God, lift up your hand in judgment. Do not forget the suffering. Why has the wicked spurned and shown disrespect to God? He has said to himself, you will not require me to account. You have seen it, for you have noted mischief and vexation, irritation, to take it into your hand. The unfortunate commits himself to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and the evildoer. Seek out his wickedness until you find no more. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations will perish from his hand. O Lord, you have heard the desire of the humble and oppressed. You will strengthen their heart. You will incline your ear to hear, to vindicate and obtain justice for the fatherless and the oppressed, so that man who is of the earth will no longer terrify them. That was Psalm 10. Who out there still thinks that the wicked are lying in wait for those who say nothing will ever happen to me? We live currently in a country filled with people whose relatives a generation or two ago, grandparents for you, grandparents, great grandparents for some, who were part of World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Some of you who have been to Iraq and Afghanistan, Africa, Syria, and yet you still have people here in America who pretend like there's not a world war that has always been going on and is continuing to go on. And like if things aren't getting any worse, you have some people who are still lulled to sleep. Lulled to sleep may not even be the right phrase. Ignorant. Ignorance is bliss. I was recently on a sister's show, and she asked me about men, about her husband and others like them that, they go to church once a week. They don't pray. They don't read their Bibles. And they act like everything's okay. Nothing's going on, just day by day. Like if there's not an urgency that's in their spirit. It's sad to see men with all the access in the world at your hands to news and to ignore the signs of the times. It's even more sad to hear that the brethren aren't doing what they're supposed to be in their own homes. It's even further sad that we have brethren who will come onto this channel and others and show their vileness, their arrogance, their ignorance, how ungodly they are. They'll sit here and they'll argue with you about people that I interview, people that I'm friends with, anything and everything, and yet they don't practice what they preach. There's very little mercy in their own wrath. But while we sit here waiting for World War III and for the nukes to drop, we say, Lord, please remember mercy in your wrath on us. Some of you don't even remember mercy in your own wrath when you're cutting down the brethren left and right because you have a different opinion than them. Just remember, just remember, you're accountable for every single word you ever utter. And I know for me, myself, that is worrisome because I have said a lot of really stupid things in my life about very, very, very stupid people. I've let my emotions run away. And you think within your own pride and arrogance, your own fault that what I'm saying is righteous indignation. Be careful every word you say, and how you you weigh out your measurement of people, how you judge people, because it'll be weighed and measured and judged to you the same. So, one of the things I'd like to just try to reiterate, I'll try to reiterate this to the brethren. Be wise as serpents, and be gentle as doves. Gentle with each other. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. If you can do that, then you can follow all the commandments. If somebody is saying something that you don't like to hear, then instead of stirring strife, instead of causing vexation, instead of causing humiliation, unless the person is speaking biblically in error and willfully, wrongfully in error, in such a way in error that they are a liar, that they are willfully trying to lie to gain something from somebody or hide something from somebody, then if you're going to approach somebody, if you're going to say something to them about something that they said, do it privately. Don't do it on a public platform, on a public venue. Now, I don't think some of you understand this. The entire world is against us. The entire world is against followers of Christ. They showed no mercy to him. They shall show no mercy to us. But yet, we don't show mercy to each other. I find that to be very interesting in times like this, where we have what appears to be prophecy coming to life off the pages of the Bible. It's going to get worse. You know that, right? It's going to get worse. I was telling my wife today, we went to go and because I'm in here, they're in there watching a movie and hanging out. Went to get some of the old fashioned candies and some cheeseburgers, and I'm just sitting here, you know, enjoying eating a cheeseburger and drinking a Dr. Pepper. And, I'm in a vehicle with air conditioning, not getting shot at. I'm not looking for roadside bombs. It's not 100,000 million degrees outside. And, no one's trying to envelop us. No one's trying to ambush us. There's no suicide bombers. There's not a bunch of little kids screaming, "Mister, Mister, give me chocolate." It's not war. One of these days we are going to miss this. We're gonna miss the things that we gripe and moan and complain about. someday, um, possibly for some of us, we're going to look back while we're entering the tribulation, and we're all going to probably say, hey, remember when I could just take out this plastic card and buy whatever I wanted if I had money on it? Now we can't because we choose not to put it here or here. The mark. I think about things like this. How hard and difficult will it be? What, by the time we march up to World War III, which, by the way, speaking of World War III, I just got done with listening to Annie Jacobson's newest book called Nuclear War, which that is on my must reads list. That is a must read book. For any of you who are a history nerd like me, for any of you who are a wartime nerd like me, and for those of you who need a good endorphin rush, backed by nothing but, I don't know, provocative white papers and declassified documents that I have no idea how Annie Jacobson got access to this stuff. Of course, she's been working on this book for 4 years. She was talking about stuff like coup plans and cog plans in ways that she shouldn't have been. Only say that because I know what coup plans are, and I know what cog plans are, and I've been involved with creating some of those for certain agencies, so I know a little bit about this stuff. Probably 10,000 times more than the average citizen. And for her to come out and talk about stuff that never gets talked about, that was very interesting. That tells me quite a few things. That tells me that if all this stuff is being declassified right now about our chances of being absolutely annihilated during a nuclear war is coming out, well, I guess those hopes went bye-bye. The first the first chapter of the book is about 48 minutes. It's about 48 minutes. And it goes through a nuclear blast. The aggressor is North Korea. North Korea hits us with an ICBM. It ends up being 2 ICBMs, one from sea, one from land. The one from sea hits right off the coast of California, which gives us about 3 minutes of 3 to 6 minutes of figuring out. I think it's 6 minutes of figuring out what the object is and what's about to happen. The other one is an ICBM that is a MERV. It's a multiple reentry rocket, reentry vessel vehicle, however the nomenclature is now. And so by the time it's fired near Pyongyang and it gets to us, we have about 38 minutes. 38 minutes. Now, where this nuke hits is it hits dead center, Washington, D.C. during the spring right now, like this time frame, at about 3:30 when everybody's on the road. Baseball games are going on, kids are outside playing, and the sheer utter annihilation of that 100-mile radius blast zone and everything after that that becomes irradiated. And it's what she talks about is a decapitation strike. That's what we warn we'll do to Iran. That's what we warn we'll do to North Korea, to many others. And in this book, in Annie Jacobson's book, they did it to us. Now, she didn't write this whimsically in like a fantasy. She had former Secretary of States, SecDevs, Secretary of Defenses, former 3-star, 4-star generals, flag officers, members of the White House, members of multiple different presidency advisors, multiple members of the FBI, the Secret Service, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, Space Force, the Navy, the Coast Guard, Special Operations Divisions, all helped to write this book. Multiple doctors, PhD professors, scientists, people who invented all these bombs, the platforms for the bombs, who invented the carriers to carry the bombs. Um, I mean, it was the most amount of research I have ever seen her do, and I have all of her books. Annie Jacobson is by far, when it comes to history, she is my favorite author. I mean, I've tried getting her on our show. She's so hard to get a hold of. But I have hours of questions for her in her research. But what this book exposed in a lot of ways was that the government still admits we're not ready for a first strike. Even our nuclear defense weaponry that says it can shoot down a nuke from the sky, we have a 45% chance of hitting something. So that's not good. A 45% chance. So, you'll learn a lot about this book. You'll learn that eventually, at the height of the Cold War, there was over 60,000 thermonuclear weapons, each with a blast radius of at least 100 miles in radius of just a crater. We had over 60,000 of those between Russia and us. We created weapons that could have destroyed every planet in the solar system. And for some of you flat earthers, that's going to be really hard to understand. But every planet in our solar system, we could have wiped out. I mean, you got to think about the diabolical nature of men, the inherent evilness of men, of our flesh. I mean, when Jesus said if he did not come back in time, there would be no flesh left alive. If we went into all out, mutually assured destruction, there would be no flesh left alive. Heck, there wouldn't be very many buildings standing either. Good to know the insects most likely will still be here. So it's a sobering book. It's a very sobering book. It's one of those books that will make you sit back and go, well, what's the sense of prepping? What's the point of it? I believe the point of it is that her book shows that very rare, extraordinarily real possibility of thermonuclear war. And from there, let's say one mad king shot just one of these towards us, and we retaliate. Well, the way the American plan is, if you shoot one at us, we shoot two at you. If you shoot two at us, we shoot three at you. One nuclear bomb going off anywhere in the world is a nuclear bomb that went off in the world. The whole world will be affected. It only grows worse in magnification of that per every bomb that goes off. And so I look back and I go, well, who could take advantage of a time like that? When the whole world lies in the evil one, the goal must be then to get us to all eventually get to a state of point, as Jesus talks about in Matthew 24, where we're all about to just kill each other. We're all about to nuke each other. And then one man comes on scene, causes a ceasefire. And you know the story from there. So the build up to the Antichrist, that's where we're going. Some people say 2029. a meteor's going to hit or whatever. 2030 something, a meteor's going to hit or whatever. I don't judge things based off of that. I judge things based off of war. Me personally, the way I look at eschatology, and I've spent many years now researching it, doesn't mean I'm right. But what I have seen is that everything is depending on how mankind goes to war with each other, to the point where if someone doesn't step in, we're all going to be dead and then nobody's getting saved. So, yeah, that's why it's a good book. It's a sobering book. It's a book that the three of us, me, Damus, and Justin, guys from the Vindicta Solutions team, we're coming back from Corpus Christi and we're listening to this book, and it was a quiet ride, which has never happened. It's always nonstop laughing when we're together, but that was a very sobering, quiet ride. So, for any of you, I highly recommend Nuclear War, Annie Jacobson. All right, so did some research earlier today. God put this on my heart yesterday to be talking about this. So we'll see what the plan is here. But I want to give you a brief worldview history, a historical look on human sacrifices. Now, I don't expect something like this to be taught in a church, but human sacrifices have been documented all throughout the world. It's documented in your Bible frequently. And so I want to go over this for those of you who feel interested. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a slow read. Consider this more of a discussion. But I'm going to give you a Christian's worldview of this as it is. When we think about human sacrifices to the little g gods, these are demonic spirits, demonic entities. These are the fallen angels that all these other tribes around the world, or should I say every tribe around the world, eventually ended up serving or worshiping at some point in time in their history, to include Israel multiple times. So, starting off, and yeah, abortions, that's absolutely part of human sacrifices. Hu- Abortions, the self-help suicide stuff that's going on in Canada, God forbid. This nation has a lot of trouble if you think you're out of hot water. But don't worry, Trump will save everybody. All right, let's start off with the Incas. So, how the Incas commit their human sacrifices? Kind of interesting. The Capacocha ceremonies. So, these ceremonies, it was a important sacrificial rite among the Inca that typically involved the sacrifice of children. I've actually been to many of these sites. Children of both sexes were selected from across the Inca Empire for sacrifice in the Capacocha ceremonies, which was performed at important shrines distributed across the empire, known as huacas or waka akunas. Children were sacrificed to the mountains, like on top of a mountain. And you're going to see something very interesting when we talk about a lot of these human sacrifices. A lot of these things happen near caves, underground, underworld, sinkholes, underground, underworld, or on top of mountains. So the mountains, of course, is what? Where the watchers come, where the gods live at, the little g gods, where their spirits and all that are at, and they ascend, right? So the children were sacrificed to the mountain as a sacrifice to the mountain itself, or to their other pantheon of gods. The children were collected from all over the Inca Empire. and were brought to the ritual sites in pairs as a boy and a girl, and would be carried in litters until they reached one of many sacrificial destinations on top of a mountain. The ages of the children that were sacrificed and that have been dug up and found by archaeologists varied from very young, as toddlers, some about 3 years old, to teenagers, to about 16 years old. Victims were sometimes buried on the sides of volcanoes as part of that sacrifice. The Incas' primary god was the sun god, or Inti, which made agriculture possible. The Inca ruler himself was considered to be the son of the sun god. Thus, Inca emperors were worshipped and considered divine, inhabiting the apex of a vast theocratic state. So, I want to stop right there. One thing that's interesting to know is that a lot of these pagan societies, these heathenistic societies, the emperors, the ones in charge, the pharaohs, were always considered to be some sort of a lineage to the divine. So that's very interesting there. I wonder what's going on with the bloodlines. All right, so getting back into this, this was to create and maintain relationships, the sacrifices. To create and maintain relationships with their quote little g gods, the Incas gave them a variety of different offerings. These range from simple prayers, food, cocoa leaves, and woven cloth to animals, blood sacrifices, and the ultimate, the human sacrifice. And especially on certain times, such as when an emperor died, or when volcanoes erupted, or severe earthquakes hit, or famine struck, or El Ninos hit in the Andes area, the priest sacrificed captured warriors or specially raised, and this is what's kind of very sad, specially raised children who were considered perfect formed children to the gods. So you had a breeding program of Inca women who would, and most of the time it was a female that would go into these like almost like a monastery, where the child would be taken care of their entire life until sacrificed. But they were giving birth for sacrifices. The Incas believed in an afterlife and that the children that they sacrificed would inhabit a better and more abundantly provided for world, which is not what happened. Very sad. Huacas played an important role in beliefs in the pre Columbian Indies. In the highlands, they were often identified with the highest peak. They were the center of local religious beliefs and supported the ethnic identity of the local groups, often representing their divine ancestors. By performing rituals for the Huacas, the Incas established a hierarchy within local groups and managed provisional politics. By making sacrifices, the Incas also emphasized the position of the emperor as the provider of the realm, as he was able to negotiate with the gods. How many times have you ever heard that or seen that on any of these types of movies where you have one guy who's in charge and they say, I'm the one that the gods listen to, so do everything I say, because if without me, you can't get nothing from those guys upstairs. Well, that's pretty much how the emperor for the Incas were. So, thus, they introduced the local Wakas into the imperial pantheon and ascribed to them as a place in their religious hierarchies. Now, prestigious and political reasons caused the Incas to give the Capicocha ritual a rank that allowed it to be performed only by the state. So, a random person could not take a random child and sacrifice them. This is where the state government says these sacrifices will happen. You didn't even have a choice either, by the way. The ritual included the most important goods that were manufactured and controlled by the Incas. The children and young women that were chosen for sacrifice were ideally to have great beauty and no imperfections, and the females had to all be virgins. Chroniclers described some of the children as having been killed by a blow to the head, by being buried alive, by having their hearts removed, or by strangulation. Evidence of human sacrifices has been found among pre Inca cultures in the Andes. However, the sacrificing of children in state sponsored ceremonies was a practice associated primarily with the Incas until a mass sacrifice of children was recently found among the Kimu in northern Peru. An estimated of 137 children ages 5 to 14 years old were immolated, that means burned alive, during the years of 1400 to 1450 AD, and several had signs that their hearts had been removed. Sacrifices probably occurred during an El Nino phenomenon that had caused catastrophic flooding. However, the large number of child sacrificial victims far exceeded these known to have been made by the Incas or indeed by any other society in the Americas. All right, and it's only going to get worse from here. The Aztecs. Now, what we're about to read was wrote by the author Mark Cartwright, pulled off of worldhistory.org, specifically called Aztec Sacrifice. And this is pretty freaking brutal. I don't know what's worse, them or the Mayans at this point. But actually, there is someone who tops them. So, the religion of the Aztec civilization, which flourished in ancient Mesoamerica from 1345 to 1521, has gained an infamous reputation for bloodthirsty human sacrifice, with lurid tales of the beating heart being ripped from the still conscious victim, decapitations, skinnings, and dismemberment. All of these things did happen, but it is important to remember that for the Aztecs, the act of sacrifice, of which human sacrifice was only a part of, was a strictly ritualized process which gave the highest possible honor to their gods and was regarded as a necessity to ensure mankind's continued prosperity. Some of you may be thinking right now, why in the heck is Doug talking about this? Because we talk about America being Babylon. Just wait till we read about the human sacrifices that were done in Babylon and in that area around Israel. You'll wish that we were talking about this. Here's the reason why. It's because history repeats itself. History has been repeating itself. History is going to repeat itself. Men's hearts will fail them for fear of what is going to happen on this earth. After what I'm about to describe to some of you, I think many of you would faint upon the horrific methods of slaughter. Once again, this is not something that I expect to be read out inside a church, but it's right there in your Bible. It talks about it right there in your Bible. These civilizations were popping up all over the world. Christians had interactions with these types of civilians all over the world, or these societies all around the world. And now these societies surpass those that are Christian on this planet. And there's going to come a very real day where this stuff is going to be back in the news. I mean, it's already back in Mexico. The cartel already does this. Literally does this right here, what I'm about to read to you. The cartel has been doing this. So yeah, let's keep going. If you got kids listening, you may want to not let them listen to this. All right. All of these things did happen. All right. But once again, for the Aztecs, this act of sacrifice was a religious rite. It was a religious rite. And this was all considered honorable. All right. So while we're thinking it's detestable, This entire civilization believed it was honorable. Imagine the amount of demonized people that had to be in this civilization. When there is no God in the land, when there is no cross shining a shadow on sins in the land, this is what happens. For those of us in America, I shudder to think what happens when the churches all start to shut down and never open their doors up again. Of course, many of those churches probably don't need to have their doors open. So here's their origins and purpose for this human sacrifice. We're only on page 3 of 40 pages, by the way. The Aztecs were not the first civilization in Mesoamerica to practice this. Most likely it was the Olmec civilization between 1200 to 300 BCE, which first began such rituals atop their sacred pyramids. Once again, pyramids all around the world. Other civilizations, such as the Maya and the Toltecs, continued these practices. The Aztecs did, however, they took sacrifice to an unprecedented scale. Although that scale was undoubtedly exaggerated by earlier chronicles during the Spanish conquest, probably to vindicate the Spaniards and their own brutal treatment of the indigenous peoples. Nevertheless, it is thought that hundreds, perhaps even thousands of victims were sacrificed each year at the great Aztec religious sites, and it cannot be denied that there would have been a useful secondary effect of intimidation on visiting ambassadors and the populace in general. In Mesoamerica, in this culture, the human sacrifice is reviewed as and listen to this, a repayment for the sacrifices the gods had themselves made in creating the world and the sun. So, somewhere at some point in time, either a fallen angel or demonic entities were telling these people, we created the world, we created the sun. If you want that to all go bye bye, then don't keep spilling blood on the pyramids. So, because of this repayment for the sacrifices of the little g gods, there was the gross amount of carnage. This idea of repayment was especially true regarding the myth of the reptilian monster. Let me see if I can pronounce this. Um, Sipek, Capactally, whatever, Quetzalcoatl, and one of these other creatures um, were ripped into pieces to create the earth and the sky. And all of the things, such as mountains, rivers, and springs, came from their various body parts. The Norse mythology, of which I used to be a pagan Norseman, um, they talk about the same thing in creating the world by slaying giants. We'll go over that one day. But it's the same story. It's the same lie. So, to console the spirits of these gods, they promised human hearts and blood in appeasement. From another point of view, sacrifices were a compensation to demonic entities for what they claimed were crimes which brought about mankind in the Aztec mythology. Think about that. Once again, their gods are telling these people that a crime was committed when you were made, and now you owe us your blood and hearts and pain and suffering. In the story of Quetzalcoatl's stolen bones from the underworld, they were made the first humans. So after Quetzalcoatl died, his bones were stolen, taken down the underworld, made the first humans, so that sacrifices were necessary as an apology to the gods. The gods, little g gods, then were fed and nourished with the sacrificial blood and flesh, which ensured the continued balance of prosperity of the Aztec society. In Nahuatl, the word for sacrifice is vamana, which derives from ventli, offering, and mana, to spread out, representing the belief that sacrifices helped in the cycle of growth of death in food, life, and energy. Accordingly, meat was burnt or blood was poured over the statues of deities so that gods might partake of it directly. This whole burnt offering, the spilling of blood, is in every society around the world that I have researched so far. Now, I've only been doing this for so many years, but it doesn't take much of a Google to figure out that at some point in time, all these different groups from around the world who should know nothing about each other were all sacrificing to deities, to the small g gods, the exact same way. That's interesting. Little coordination there. Perhaps the quintessential example of feeding the gods were these ceremonies to ensure that the sun god was well nourished so that he had the strength to raise the sun each morning. In multiple different cultures, the sun god is called who? Same thing as the storm god, Lucifer, Satan. All right, non human sacrifices of the Aztecs, bloodletting and self harm. For example, from the ears and legs using bone or spines from stingrays, because that just hearing that, I get this Steve Irwin effect in my head. And the burning of blood-soaked paper strips were a common form of sacrifice, as was the burning of tobacco and incense. Other types of sacrifice included the offering of other living creatures, such as deer, butterflies, and snakes. In a certain sense, offerings were given in sacrifice, precious objects which were willingly handed over to the gods to enjoy. In this category were foodstuffs, objects like jewelry, precious metals, jade, seashells, which could be ritually buried. One of the most interesting such offerings was the dough images of gods. These were made from ground mixture, like a cornbread mixture, with human blood and honey, with the effigy being burnt or eaten after the ritual. Gross. Preparing the victims. With human sacrifices, these sacrificial victims were often selected from captive warriors. Indeed, warfare was often conducted for the sole purpose of furnishing candidates for sacrifice. This was the so called Flowery War, which were indecisive engagements where the result of the Aztecs being satisfied with taking only sufficient captives for sacrifice, and where the eastern Tlaxcala state was a favorite hunting ground. Those who had fought the most bravely or were the most handsome were considered the best candidates for sacrifice and more likely to please the gods. Indeed, human sacrifice was particularly reserved for those most worthy and most considered a high honor, a direct communion with a god. So, in a lot of ways, when you see many of these cults around the world, especially ones like ISIS, where they were taking people and ritualistically killing all of them, Who are they sacrificing them to? Not to God, not to Jesus. This is once again, imagine going back in time and experiencing this type of reality, this type of world with nothing but your Bible. How would you broach this subject of Christianity to these people? I think many people would run for the hills. This stuff still happens. It still happens today. Except now, where a lot of this happens at is at places like the Met Gala or these Hollywood festivals with all these super wealthy elite people. Another source of sacrifice and sacrificial victims was the ritual ball games. Now, this one will stir up something for some of you men who've played baseball, football, or soccer or rugby. So, the ball games where the losing captain of the team, or sometimes even the entire team, paid the ultimate uh, price for defeat. Children, too, could be sacrificed, in particular, to honor the rain god, Tlaloc, in ceremonies held on sacred mountains. Once again, going back to mountains and sacrificing children. It was believed that the very tears of the victims, would propitiate rain. Slaves were another social group from which sacrificial victims were chosen. They could accompany their ruler in death or be given an offering by tradesmen to ensure prosperity in business. Amongst the most honored sacrificial victims were the god impersonators. Specially chosen individuals were dressed as a particular god before the sacrifice. In some cases, the impersonator in the ritual, I can't even pronounce this word, Toxcatl, I think, the sixth or fifth month of the Aztec solar year, the victim was treated like royalty for an entire year, and then they were horrifically, brutally sacrificed. Perhaps even worse than all the other god impersonators was this one guy. Oh, this poor person. Zepi Totek. Whoever was the impersonator for the little g god Totek, at the climax of the festival, and once again, these festivals would last for an unknown amount of time, um, when they were going to be sacrificed. But this one guy who decided to be the impersonator for this god was skinned alive to honor the god who he was himself known as the flayed one. And if anyone's asking what's this document that I'm reading from, this is just a collection of many, many multiple documents. If you are on the Patreon channel, I'm going to post all of my notes into the Patreon channel, so you'll be able to see it there. All right, rituals and death. Conducted at specially dedicated temples on the top of large pyramids. Tenectalon, Texacoco, and Tlacopan. Sacrifices were often carried out by stretching the victim over a special stone. We also saw this, where was it, in Machu Picchu, I believe. Cutting open the chest, and then removing the heart using a obsidian or flint knife. The heart was then placed in a stone vessel, or a stone figure that was carved with a recipient on their midriff and a burnt offering to the god being sacrificed to. So they would have a small stone statue that was a representation of that god, and they'd put someone's heart in it and burn it. And then from there, they had alternative ways of killing people, which were horrific. Um, They would decapitate people, or they would dismember people or disembowel them. Um, it was common to have decapitated bodies be flung down the steps of pyramids. And once again, this was considered to be a great honor if this happened to you. Um, Once again, the horrific part were people that would be skinned alive until they eventually died from blood loss. And that was to be the representation of husk of corn, the husk being torn off of corn. That was Zepitotek. Victims could also be sacrificed in a more elaborate process where a single victim was made to fight in a gladiatorial contest against a squad of hand-picked warriors. Naturally, the victim had no possibilities to survive this ordeal or even inflict any injury on his opponents, as not only was he tied to a stone platform, but his weapon was usually a feathered club, while his opponents had vicious razor-sharp obsidian swords. In another method, victims could be tied to a frame and shot with arrows or darts, and in perhaps the worst method of all, the victim was repeatedly thrown into a fire and then had his heart removed. So, once again, when you talk about how this was like if you were sacrificed to their gods, it was a great honor. I mean, this was industrialized human torture. It wasn't just understand what demons do to people, okay? I wish there were more teachers who would say this. The Aztecs were fooled. They were fooled by thinking that what they were doing was to appease the gods who will kill people. And that's how we pay back this blood debt for the gods creating the world. Unfortunately, what ended up happening is two things. For one, people are inherently evil. Secondly, it doesn't help for people who are inherently evil and barbaric, who live in a literal bloodlust, and to have a demonic presence influence you to warp your mind about how to kill people. The people who were killing people, it wasn't like the local bum on the street or the baker. This was a hierarchy of priests. They never got killed. The hierarchy of priests, they sacrificed people. They were never sacrificed. They were never terrorized. They never went to war. They were a politician. That's what they were. I could say so much more about that, but they were the deep state, the elites. This category of positions, of ranks of people has always been here. I guess maybe it started with Nimrod, but it has always been here. Always. When you don't have when you don't have Jesus Christ in your life, you've got this. You've got the Aztec Empire where they're literally raiding other people for people to horrifically sacrifice to their blood drunken demonic gods. I mean, how else am I going to say that, right? The flesh of those who were sacrificed were also, on occasion, eaten by the priests conducting the sacrifice and by the members of the ruling elite or the warriors who had themselves captured the victims. The Aztecs are rather famous for the many sacrificial rituals they performed at the height of their civilization. One of the most famous rituals involved the removal of a living person's heart in order to honor their sun god. However, there were also several other types of sacrifices performed by the Aztecs, such as offerings made to the Toltec, Zepitepe, and the Earth Mother. Uh, Tolok's offering required weeping boys. to be ritually murdered. Sacrificed offerings made to Zepitotec were bound to a post and shot full of arrows before being skinned by a priest. And the Earth Mother, her offerings were generally required a female to be skinned. They all had one thing in common: a less than pretty awesome ending as one of the chosen ones for sacrifice. I mean, it's horrific when you read about it. And, you know, from reading just the Bible alone, if you don't understand world history, you don't understand just how wicked men are. And we're going to go over some biblical stuff in here, but this is just a few examples of what was happening elsewhere around the world. All right. And not to be outdone by the Aztecs, we have the Mayans. Now, I've got the links to all this. It'll be in the Patreon page for anyone who wants to see it. Okay, so far to the north of the Aztecs, there'd be which was very famous for holding their victims down on top of temples and cutting out their hearts, and offering the still beating hearts to their gods. You had the Maya, who would cut the hearts out of their victims as well. And as can be seen in certain images surviving at the Piedras Negras historical site, it was much more common for them to decapitate or disembowel their sacrificial victims, or else tie them up and push them down the stone stairs of their temples. In some of the carvings, there's at least one or two. It's hard to really see it. I was going to post a picture of it, but it's really hard to see it. But they would tie you up in a ball, okay? In a ball. And these are pretty good steps. They're pretty high. And they would roll you down repeatedly. What would that end up doing? Well, that would end up breaking collarbones, shoulder bones, the arm bones, the hands, feet, ankles, back, fracturing skulls, fracturing the femurs. I mean, you would be a broken, bloodied mess. And if you weren't dead, they would drag you all the way back up to the top, and then they would do it again multiple times. And after you died, they'd drag you all the way back up the top, and they'd do it again for fun. The methods had much more to do with who was being sacrificed and for what purpose. Prisoners of war were usually disemboweled. When the sacrifice was religiously linked to the ball games, the prisoners were more likely to be decapitated or pushed down the stairs. Sometimes, to actually start the ball games, they would have multiple sacrifices tied up and thrown down the stairs of these gigantic ziggurat pyramids. And that's how they would, that's how they'd introduce it. That was their Super Bowl halftime. To the Maya, death and sacrifice were spiritually linked to the concepts of creation and rebirth. In the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Maya, the hero twins, I'm not even going to pronounce their names, I can't even do it, must journey to the underworld, i.e., die, before they can be reborn into the world above. In another section of the same book, the god Tohil, small g god, asked for human sacrifice in exchange for the gift of fire. A series of glyphs deciphered at the Yaxcalan archaeological site links the concept of beheading to the notion of creation or awakening. Sacrifices often marked the beginning of a new era. This could be the ascension of a new king or the beginning of a new calendar cycle. These sacrifices were meant to aid in the rebirth and renewal of the harvests and life cycles, and were often carried out by the priest and or the nobles, especially the kings. Children were sometimes used as sacrificial victims at such times as well. Going back to the twins who would dive down into the underworld, one of the things that the Mayans did, and I watched a very good documentary about this. Oh, I actually believe it's on Discovery, the Discovery app on Roku. And there was an art. He's a Mexican archaeologist. He goes into tunnels and all that, and like our team, the Paleo Research Crew, and some of the tunnels that he went to had hundreds, if not thousands, of children and women that were sacrificed and thrown into these wells, thrown into these pits. They were literally taken underground and dropped into underground rivers. And he went and he dove in these, and he saw what he said was hundreds, if not thousands, of infant skulls. Thousands. And this documentary only came out a few years ago. Um, Me and Tim Alberino, we were talking about this documentary while we're in Peru, and that's one of the reasons. One of the things for why he wanted to go down to the state where the Mayas were and scout around, get as much of a information of that area. And so, I mean, this was one of those tribes of people who believed that the underworld, caverns, caves, is where many of the gods also were. So once again, you know, you have these two concepts. You have the mountaintops and you have the caves. It's very interesting here. So sacrifice in the ball games for the Maya. For the Maya, the human sacrifices were associated with the ball game. The game, which a hard rubber ball was knocked around by players, mostly using their hips, often had religious or symbolic or spiritual meaning to it. Maya images show a clear connection between the ball and decapitated skulls, decapitated heads. The balls were even sometimes made from human skulls. Sometimes a ball game would be a sort of coronation or a continuation of a victorious battle. Captive warriors from the vanquished tribe or the city state would be forced to play and then sacrificed afterwards. A famous image carved in the stone of Chichen Itza shows a victorious ball player holding aloft the decapitated head of the opposing team leader. And unfortunately, it only gets worse from here. You have the politics and the human sacrifice part. Captive kings and rulers were often highly prized sacrifices. In other carvings, a local ruler called the Bird Jaguar the Fourth plays the ball game in full gear while Black Deer, a captured rival chieftain, bounces down a nearby stairwell or stairway in the form of a ball. It is likely that the captive was sacrificed by being tied up and pushed down the stairs of a temple as part of a ceremony involving the ball game. In 738 CE, a war party from this area captured the king of a rival city state of Copan, and the captive king was thus ritually sacrificed. Ritual bloodletting of the Maya. Another aspect of the Maya blood sacrifices involved ritual bloodletting. In the Popol Vuh, the first Maya pierced their skin to offer blood to the gods, Tohil, Avalix, and Hakavits. Maya kings and lords would pierce their flesh, generally their genitals, lips, ears, or tongues, with sharp objects such as a stingray's spine. Such spines are often found in tombs of Maya royalty. Many Maya nobles were considered semi divine, and the blood of kings was an important part of certain Maya rituals, often those involving agriculture. Not only male nobles, but females as well took part in ritual bloodletting. Royal blood offerings were smeared on idols or dripped onto bark paper, which was then burned. Once again, the burnt blood offerings. The rising smoke could open a gateway of sorts between the worlds. The Mayas held a strong belief in a divine power, which they thought was contained deep within limestone sinkholes or cenotes, or cenotes, as they called them. They believed these to be portals that led into the underworld and would cast their own people into them. According to their beliefs, those thrown into the cenote would not die. Of course, they were never seen again, but recent discoveries from archaeologists have shown the remains of fractured skeletons of young people, old people, women, men, and none of them look enlightened at all. All right, so moving from Mesoamerica, we're going to go to Ghana, Africa. Each year in Dahomey, I don't speak this language, so forgive me. I have the worst redneck accent, and speaking Gahana is not exactly native to me. In this place called Dahomey, known as Ghana now, within West Africa, there was a large celebration that involved gift giving discussions amongst leaders. Seems pretty nice. Leaders get together, give a bunch of gifts, which incidentally was large amounts of human sacrifice. Many slaves of the area were killed at that one point in time during that gift giving, along with war captives and criminals to honor the deceased kings of their people. The victims were generally sacrificed by decapitation. Decapitation was utilized so much at these events that the ceremonies were literally translated to yearly head business. What nice people. All right. Moving over to the Celts, which is where a lot of you who are watching right now, these are your long lost relatives. The Celts, when the Roman Empire expanded, it stopped human sacrifice, a practice largely taboo in Greco Roman culture, with a few expectations. Most Roman writings show that they felt morally superior by not engaging in this human sacrifice. One group that the Romans called the Gauls, anyone remember when the Gauls invaded Rome? Otherwise known to us as the Celts, ritually killed children in much of ancient Europe. The Celts were a brutal but loose knit band of tribes who would occasionally join forces to fight off the invading Romans. In warfare, the Celts would behead their enemies and embalm the severed heads as trophies to take with them. Of course, this also scared off would be enemies as an act of psychological warfare. Remember, fear is a weapon. So it should come as no surprise that such a hardcore ethnic group would occasionally practice child sacrifice to appease their demonic gods. Roman authors galore, um, including Julius Caesar, documented the practice and the abhorrence of it at great length. Now, recent excavations of Celtic sites have turned up mummies of sacrificed children as well as structures of human-made fountains of blood where the drinking of blood and cannibalism would take place. The Celts were a terrifyingly violent culture, and these practices show just how brutal humankind can be if left to their own devices and culture, especially if left without Christ. Moving on, anybody ever heard of Fiji? In Fiji, they had a ritual of human sacrifice as well. The minute a woman became a widow in Fiji, she was destined to be strangled to death. This practice was based on the belief that a deceased husband should be buried with his wife. In the case of great chiefs, their deaths simultaneously brought forth the asphyxiation based demise of his various Watina Lalai little wives. These women were then referred to as the Thotho, the carpeting of his grave. To make things even worse, it was typically the woman's brother's duty to perform the task, or at least to watch it, to superintend it. Perhaps the honor of carrying out such a task was enough to take the brother's mind off the fact that he was murdering his own sister, but the way they had to kill them was to be by the neck strangled. Once again, man, you're going to hear this over and over. Without Christ, expect this type of barbarity to happen. Has happened, is happening, will continue to happen. It will come back again. Japan. This we're going to talk about happened with the samurai culture. But in Japan, a ritual known as the seppuku was practiced for a long time and was considered to be one of the most prominent elements of Bushido, aka the way of the warrior. It consisted of a semi suicidal ritual in which the warrior was required to cut himself severely to die. The ritual was carried out for a variety of reasons, such as the loss of one's honor. Committing seppuku served as a means of restoration for one's own family line. Beforehand, in the case of a planned seppuku, a samurai warrior would be bathed and then dressed ceremonially in white robes. He was fed his favorite meal, and his instrument, often a special knife or a short sword, would be placed on a plate before him. The warrior would then prepare his own death poem. He would write out a poem about his death. Once his final acts had been concluded, he would open his robe, he would reach for the knife, and then disembowel himself. The Kash Kashakunen, I believe is how you say the name, probably not in Redneck Texan, but the second person that would be there for this ritual, which would be his second, as it was called, would then end his life with a precise swing to the neck by sword called the kaishaku and would decapitate the person. So far, you probably are gathering a few things about these cultures. Bloodletting and decapitations appear to be some of the most familiar things that we have with these little g gods and what they demand from people. Don't forget that it was little David, before he was king, who decapitated one of their champions as well. So now we're going into the next one, which is it's a bit of a phantasm. The Druids. The Druids were a part of the Celt society. I separated the two for a reason, because you have the Celt warrior class and then you have the Druid class. Now, a lot of what is taking place with the Druids still happens today. There's still Druids today. It is according to the National Geographic and to the Historical Society, the Archaeological Historical Society of the United Kingdom. It is in their own database that Winston Churchill was also a known Druid. Druids are a mysterious people. There have been many movies made about Druids. People think that a lot of the Illuminati, New World Order, and many other occult societies these secret societies, that many of the rites and practices that they still commit to this day are based in Druidic practices. So let's learn about it. The origin of the word Druid is still unclear, but the most popular view is that it comes from Duar, an Irish Gaelic word for oak tree, often a symbol of knowledge, also meaning wisdom. Stop right there. Few things. In Canaan, the oaks is where people would go and they would worship at the oaks. In Sparta, for you to have secret meetings or the ritualistic beatings that happened to the children in the Agoge, it would go to the oaks. It would be called hugging the oak as a ritual. What's also interesting about this and the Druidic think is about how the knowledge from a tree, where do we get that from? The Garden of Eden, all right? The tree of knowledge. This is some of the things that you can tell the play on words here from many different things that are happening in all these different societies. And it's interesting to me. It's interesting to me that very little's known about them now, but the Romans seem to have seen the most, experienced the most, but now history scholars scoff at what the Romans are saying about them. And I think there's probably a few reasons. One is they're trying to hide it. I honestly believe they're trying to hide what they saw. And we're going to read some of these accounts. Let's go into it. So the Druids were concerned with natural world and its powers, and considered trees sacred, particularly the oak tree. Druidism can be described as a shamanic religion, as it relied on a combination of contact with the spirit world and holistic medicines to treat and sometimes cause illnesses. They were said to have induced insanity in people and been accurate fortune tellers, diviners. Some of their knowledge of the earth and space may have come from megalithic times. There's a lot of mystery shrouding the actual history of the Druids, as our knowledge is based on limited records. Druidism is thought to have been a part of Celtic and Gaulish culture in Europe, with the first classical reference to them in the 2nd century BC. One of the earliest accounts of Druids was written by Julius Caesar in 59 to 51 BC. Now, this is according to Julius Caesar. All the people of Gaul are completely devoted to religion. And for this reason, those who are greatly affected by diseases and in the dangers of battle either sacrifice human victims or vow to do so using the Druids as administrators to these sacrifices, since it is judged that unless a man's life is given back, the will of the immortal gods cannot be placated. In public affairs, they have instituted the same kind of sacrifice. Others have effigies of great size interwoven with twigs, limbs of which are filled with living people, which are set on fire from below. That's the Burning Man, all right? Like the Burning Man festival that happens every year here in the desert Southwest. Yeah, that's all Druidic. And the people are deprived of life surrounded by flames. It is judged that the punishment of those who participated in theft or were brindages or other crimes are more pleasing to the immortal gods. But when the supplies of this kind fail, they even go so low as to inflict punishment on the innocent. So he wrote it in Gaul, where prestigious men were divided into druids or nobles. It was from the Roman writers that historians have gained most of their knowledge of the Druids. Druids were polytheistic. They had female gods, they had sacred figures, and rather like the Greeks and Romans, They were nomadic, less civilized. The Druidic society gave the others a sense of superiority over them. This renders some of their accounts historically uncertain at times, as they may be tainted with exaggerated examples of Druidic practices. Now, we have three sorts of data that's regarding Celtic human sacrifice. We have the words of classical Greek and Roman writers, usually with a political agenda, and often reporting heresy, such as Strabo, for instance, who was repeating the observations of the earlier, no longer extant author Poseidonus. We have a reference in medieval Irish texts, primarily in the mythological tales, and we have archaeological data that is increasingly more important now. So, according to Strabo, another one of the Roman writers, the Romans put a stop to both to these customs and to the ones connected with sacrifice and divination. This is Strabo's account. As they were in conflict with our own ways, for example, they would strike a man who had been consecrated for sacrifice in the back with a sword, and they would make prophecies based on his death spasms. And they would not sacrifice without the presence of the Druids. Other kinds of human sacrifices have been reported as well. Some men they would shoot dead with arrows and impale in the temples, or they would construct a huge figure of straw and wood, and having thrown cattle and all manner of wild animals and humans into it, they would make a burnt offering to the whole thing. Um, one of the problems with this one account from Strabo is that the Celts did not have a word for bow or arrow. They actually borrowed that word from Latin, um, uh, from the Romans, I believe. And they did not have bows and arrows in any of their possessions when they fought them. So historians tend to think Strabo's accounts are kind of exaggerated, but they may not be. Recent evidence that Druids possibly committed cannibalism and ritual human sacrifice, perhaps on a very massive scale, add weight to ancient Roman accounts of the Druidic savagery, say the archaeologists. After a first century BC visit to Britain, the Romans came back with horrific stories about these high ranking priests of the Celts who had spread throughout much of Europe over the 2,000-year period. Julius Caesar, who led the first Roman landing in 55 BC, once again, said that the native Celts believed that the gods delight in the slaughter of prisoners and criminals, and when the supply of captives would run short, that they would even sacrifice innocent people. All right, moving on. All right, so now we're going to go back to Mesoamerica. We're going to talk about the Olmec. The Olmec civilization was one of the oldest large settlements in prehistoric Mesoamerica. Their culture and sphere of influence spanned much of southern North America, including the area which encompasses the modern day countries of Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. The evidence is fairly damning for the Olmec people. They are believed to be the first known Mesoamerican culture to practice human sacrifice. They're significantly older than any other culture from the earlier Americas. Around 300 BC, the Olmec people mysteriously vanished. The human rainforest must have ate away the bones of the people who'd previously lived there, and all we have left are the relics of their former cultures. Yet, we do have evidence of child sacrifice in ancient Mesoamerica. Thousands upon thousands upon thousands of bones have been recovered from various sites, including the Midnight Terror Cave. That's the Midnight Terror Cave in Belize, and the Sacred Shrine of El Manati. This culture, the Olmec, sacrificed thousands and thousands of children to their little g gods. The bones of these children, along with many of those women that they sacrificed, have been left behind for archaeologists to find. And we have the Toltec people. What other cultures did on a small scale, the Toltec civilization did on a massive scale. Many civilizations inhabited the southern part of Northern America over time. The Toltec came right before the reign of the Aztecs in the modern day Mexico. They dominated the area from the 10th to 12th centuries AD, and the sacrifice of live children was apparently a staple of their culture like the others before them. Near Tula, Mexico, a mass grave was uncovered during construction, which contained the remains of at least 24 children. All the evidence was there of a mass killing and child sacrifice to the gods. The bodies are believed to have been killed and buried sometime between AD 950 and AD 1150. Compared to our significantly less violent world today, this was definitely an unusual culture and perhaps gives us a glimpse into the world of the past and the humans and their savage tendencies. God save those people. It's hard to read over and over and over, and especially when I was researching this. Like I was gonna do like almost a slide and include pictures. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. You can let your own imagination run wild there. But these people in Mesoamerica, once again, it's interesting that all this is starting to come back. It's all starting to come back. We'll see it again. All right. Teotihuacan. Many Mesoamerican cultures built megalithic structures on which they would perform their macabre of human sacrifices. And the Pyramid of the Moon was one such structure in Tehuacan, Mexico, where the Mesoamerican civilizations who lived there long ago would tear the hearts out of children and sacrifice them to the gods, the little g gods. The pyramid structure is approximately 2,000 years old, and the site contains the remains of many children who'd been sacrificed by this ancient culture. Strangely, the people who lived there left zero clues as to what their culture might be about. No hieroglyphs, no writing. As with common early Mesoamerican cultures, the Teotihuacanos just seemingly disappeared overnight, and we can't figure out why. Centuries later, the Aztecs referred to Teotihuacan as the city of the gods. Teotihuacanos had left their structures completely intact for all the others to find later. Moving on to China. Although human sacrifice was usually performed for ancestral deities in earlier Chinese civilizations, there were other motives for such offerings. One such alleged variation in sacrificial purpose was to strengthen a structure or a building. One of the most famous examples of this was the sacrifice of the crown prince of Sai after he was caught in battle, which brought ruin upon his kingdom. He was sacrificed with the intention of strengthening a dam. All right, Babylonians. The Babylonians sacrificed humans to their chief deity, Marduk, as well as others like Anu, a deity to the city of Uruk during the later years of the Babylonian Empire. Annual fire festivals where they would sacrifice children to the god Anu happened frequently. So they would have fire festivals, they would gather children, and they would throw them live into fires. I don't know. Maybe you parents out there can understand, but me as a parent, I just don't get it. I can't see it. I can't see the benefit of it. I can't see myself ever wanting to do that, needing to do that. So you got to ask yourself as a Christian, once again, what possesses people to take their offspring and to horrifically kill them for something that is their gods. Moving forward, Canaan. Canaan is the all encompassing term for the land which is modern day Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Israel. The Bible is replete with references to an ancient Canaanite god named Molech. Molech, to whom human sacrifices were both the norm and seemingly plentiful to. Moloch was even referred to as the god of child sacrifice by some. This deity was thought to be very well pleased with offerings that burned living people, notably children, in a fire. In our Holy Bible, the book of Leviticus even forbids this practice. It plainly states this practice. Leviticus chapter 18, verse 21 says, "Neither shall you give any of your offspring to offer them to Moloch, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." Our own U.S. politicians do this every year, every single year. Oh, man. All right, moving on. Israel. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about Bohemian Grove. Israel. Before the decree in Leviticus, the Israelites often practiced human sacrifice, which included children, sometimes even to the foreign god Baal. We find further scriptures, such as those in Kings, which claim that the Israelites worshipped false gods, engaged in the ritual killing of human children. You can find this in Chronicles and also in Kings. The Bible describes the children of ancient Israel as being used much like animals for burned offerings. So think of that the same way that the Inca would literally birth children specifically to be sacrificed to the mountains, to the volcanoes, to their gods. The Israelites were known to burn their children like they would a lamb, a goat, a sheep, a cow. No accountability, no sensibility, no connection at all to that life. Some scholars have vehemently denied these allegations, though the descriptions are right there in the works, right there in the words. Should be noted that human sacrifices were very taboo and violated the laws of God. Moving forward, we're going to talk about Carthage and the Phoenicians. So, according to various accounts of Phoenician and Carthaginian civilization, the people of these groups religiously sacrificed children, probably more than anyone else. This was apparently the most extreme sacrifice that could be performed at the time. It was therefore the best means for protecting the entire community. The fact the sacrificial areas of the Phoenicians were known as Topheth, the roasting place, and the sacrifices themselves were referred to as mulk, or the king's offerings. According to Diodorus Siculus, the account of the Carthaginians was like this: there was in their city a bronze image of Kronos, extending its hands, palms up, and sloping toward the ground, so that each one of the children, when placed thereon, would roll down and fell into a sort of gaping pit filled with fire. Oh, man. So, once again, for those of you who are just now joining us and you're hearing about this horrific stuff that I'm reading, what's the point in learning this? Why does a Christian need to learn all this? Why don't you just need to learn that Jesus loved me? Yes, I know. And go to back to your coloring books. Everything's going to be okay. You live in it'll never happen to me, America, land. Why is it worth knowing this? It's worth knowing this because Solomon says there's nothing new under the sun. And Jesus said worse times are going to happen. I don't know what could be worse than this, than the things that we're reading. I don't know what could be worse. But what does the Word of God have to say about human sacrifice? If you have your Bibles, please turn to Leviticus chapter 20 on human sacrifice and immoralities. All right, here we are. If you're not ready, catch up. Leviticus chapter 20, the Old Testament. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, moreover, you shall say to the children of Israel, any Israelite or any stranger residing in Israel who gives any of his children to Molech, the god of the Ammonites, as a human sacrifice, shall most certainly be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I will also set my face against that man, opposing him, withdrawing my protection from him, and will cut him off from his people, excluding him from the atonement made for them, because he's given some of his children to Molech, as to defile my sanctuary and profane my holy name. If the people of the land should ever, if the people of the land should ever tolerate that man when he gives any of his children as a burnt offering to Moloch, and fail to put him to death, as my law requires, then I shall set my face against that man, against his extended family, and I will cut off from the people both him and all who follow him, playing the prostitute, committing apostasy with Moloch. Continue on, starting at verse 6. As for the person who turns to mediums, who consult the dead, some of you Christians, I'm going to stop right there. Some of you Christians, you may want to listen just for a second and see if you're not playing with fire, literally, with what I'm about to read. Because this hyper spiritualism, this dabbling dangerously with demonic entities, divination, sorcery, witchcraft, whatever name you want to give it, this is happening in churches now. My wife, she's sitting here in the comment section answering a lot of questions. I don't know if she has the article still, but she could probably find it. I don't know, honey, which one of the churches it was, but there was a church that now is doing card reading, card readings. So, where you had the drawing the cards and you'd read from the cards about whatever. Um, that's happening in churches. Be very careful, church, of places you go to and people you talk to, especially if you happen to hear what you're about to hear. As for the person who turns to mediums, who consult the dead, or to spiritists to play the prostitute after them, I shall set my face against that person and will cut him off from his people, excluding him from the atonement made for them. You shall consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my statutes and do them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. If anyone curses his father or mother, he shall most certainly be put to death. He has cursed his father or mother. His blood is on him. That is, he bears full responsibility for those consequences. The man who commits adultery with another's wife, even his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress, shall most certainly be put to death. The man who lies intimately with his father's wife was uncovered, or has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall most certainly be put to death. Their blood is on them. If a man lies intimately with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall most certainly be put to death. They've committed incense. Their blood is on them. If a man lies intimately with a male as if he were a woman, both men have committed a detestable, perverse, unnatural act. They shall most certainly be put to death. Their blood is on them. It is immoral and shameful. If a man marries a woman and her mother, all three shall be burned in fire, so that there will be no immorality among you. If a man has intimate relations with an animal, he shall most certainly be put to death. You shall kill the animal also. I have things that I could say about that, stories about Iraq. I'm going to keep those to myself because I don't feel like this is the time or the place to even share those experiences. If I could wash my eyes out with bleach, it would not get those memories out. If a woman approaches any animal to mate with it, you shall kill the woman and the animal. They shall most certainly be put to death. Their blood is on them. An interesting thing about that, you may think, why would a woman approach an animal to mate with it? So, in the Greek culture and crap, I was just reading about it. I just read a 16-hour freaking book about this, where Alexander the Great's from. All right, so his mother was a sorceress, a diviner. She was a priestess, and she worshipped a snake god. Um, Philip II, Macedonia. God, there it is. We've been saying Mesopotamia so much, I forgot the word freaking Macedonia. So, the ruler of Macedonia, Philip II, he actually it's documented him talking about this. He walked in on Alexander's mother, who was intimately lying with a what they consider to be probably a boa constrictor. And it's one of the reasons why he threw her and also Alexander out of his house and basically exclude him out of his kingdom. And for at least 10, 15 years, Philip II completely ignored his son, Alexander, who ended up, in his early 20s, taking over the kingdom. Just to let you know, that kind of stuff was happening out there. People were horrifically savage back then, even in their own thoughts, like the heathenistic, paganistic thoughts of these people. And there was always something akin to worshiping serpents all around the world. Serpents was always one of those things. Very interesting. I wonder where they get that from. All right. So moving on. If a man takes his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, so that he sees her nakedness and she sees his nakedness, it is a disgrace. They shall be cut off in the sight of the sons of their people. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness. He bears responsibility for his guilt. If a man lies intimately with a woman during her menstrual cycle and uncovers her nakedness, he has exposed her and has uncovered her and her blood. Both of them shall be cut off. Like what Leviticus goes into, and I mean it's another good page and a half of talking about things you shall stop doing. Stop doing this is because the tribe of Israel, when you read through the Old Testament in multiple different times, the tribe of Israel would take on the practices of the people around them, which is one of the reasons why it's not really ever read in church anymore. From what I am in researching, from what I see, and from what I'm being told, not very many people go back to the Old Testament. Everything's in the New Testament. I get that. But you've got to learn the why to understand exactly what's going on now. What Leviticus is talking about on human sacrifice and immoralities is the same thing that I've been going through for the past, what, freaking 2 hours of all these other civilizations and their immoralities, their human sacrifices. God willfully destroyed these nations, to include Israel, multiple times. It scattered them throughout the wind. He was so fed up with them. Church, why is it important for you to know this? Because the church looks like this now. Because the church as a whole, in all of its 1,300 different sects, are now introducing into its own ways, into the house of God, it's introducing strange fire, strange worship, worshiping, taking practice of things that are forbidden. I don't see how it's not seen. I don't see why it's not called out. Was it Bethel Hill? Some of these other churches where they want to chase after the spirit. They want to be slain in the spirit. How many of you have seen that? You'll have some weirdo pastor, quote pastor. He'll be up there dancing and singing, and then he'll do like a Star Wars force push at somebody, or the one guy who was dancing and dance his way in front of this group of women, and they all fall down screaming, been slain in the spirit. The Pentecostals do the same freaking thing. Do you not understand what you're doing is an affront to the Holy Spirit? I'm just going to tell you it is. Don't believe me, though. All right. Just to try and wrap this up as quickly as possible. Children have been sacrificed to demonic gods for a millennium or more. It's still ongoing today. We're going to read a little bit of biblical examples of these horrific acts, starting with 2 Kings chapter 3, verses 26 to 27. When the king of Moab saw that the battle was too fierce for him, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through to the king of Edom, but they could not. Then the king of Moab took his eldest son, who was to reign in his place, and offered him publicly, lifted him up, offered him publicly as a burnt offering to Chemosh, also referred to as Baal, on the city wall, horrifying everyone. Down below, he's up on the rampart of the city wall. They're all fighting down below in the valley, out in front of them. And as everyone sees him hold up his son and he throws his son into a fire. And there was great wrath against Israel that day. And Israel's allies, Judah and Edom, withdrew from King Jehoram and returned to their own land. For 2 centuries, 2 whole centuries, Moab was not conquered after that defeat. Because of this barbaric act, because the king of Moab seemed to, through child sacrifice, turn defeat into victory and retained independence for another 2 centuries. With some help from the Biblical Archaeological Society Library and an article that was wrote by the PhD professor Siegfried Horn called Why the Moabite Stone Was Blown to Pieces, and Barak Margalit and his article called the Why King Mesha of Moab Sacrificed His Oldest Son, we can now ascertain some of the following. In 1978, a cuneiform tablet from the Syrian city of Ugarit was published, and the text, which indicates that Mesha's seemingly unprecedented as well as morally outrageous act was in fact carried out in accordance with ancient Canaanite laws of holy war. The relevant text of this Ugaritic tablet is short enough to quote in full form. So this is a prayer that the Canaanites would pray, and it specifically talks about sacrifice in it. It says, if an enemy force attacks your city gates, an aggressor attacks your walls, you shall lift up your eyes to Baal and pray. And then this is their prayer. O Baal, drive away the enemy force from our gates, the aggressor from our walls. We shall sacrifice a bull to thee. Vote a pledge, we shall fulfill a firstborn. So they'll sacrifice a firstborn child. It says, Baal, we shall sacrifice a child. We shall fulfill a votage pledge. A tenth of all of our wealth we shall tithe. The temple of Baal we shall go up, in the footpaths of the house of Baal we shall walk. Then shall Baal hearken to your prayers. He shall drive the enemy force from your gates, the aggressor from your walls. So Baal as a small g god trying to act as the actual God. The difference here is that God does not need you to sacrifice people. Every other form of God seems to be around the world involves a blood sacrifice, involves some sort of a human suffering. Lord have mercy. So this text can be dated to about 1200 to 1500 BC. Some 4 centuries before Mesha of Moab. But the practices that it describes are documented as late as the Roman period. So Mesha's actions and the Israelite retreat fit perfectly within this whole Canaanite, later Punic Neo-Canaanite tradition that they have used for thousands of years. Of whenever they would be attacked, they would start sacrificing children. So in Carthage, once again, Diodorus of Sicily, about 50 BC, writes that in Sicily, the Carthaginians were besieging Syracuse, but in Libya, Agathocles had brought the Carthaginians under siege. The Carthaginians betook themselves to every manner of supplication of the divine power. So that means they did everything they possibly could to stop the siege. They sent a large sum of money and expensive offerings to Tyre. Go back and read, I think it's in Elijah or Ezekiel. I think it's Elijah 28, about the prince of Tyre, Tyre. And when they saw that their enemy encamped before their walls, they selected 200. Now, this is from a Roman writer. They selected 200 of the noblest children and they sacrificed them publicly. Imagine wherever you're at right now. Let's say let's go ahead because I'm here in Texas. Let's imagine Fort Worth. So Dallas is going to attack Fort Worth. Um, and at the let's go ahead and say that there's walls and a gate along the interstate and the highways. And as Dallas is coming to attack Fort Worth pulls out the 200 most noblest, prestigious families in Fort Worth. That means the most richest, well-known people in Fort Worth takes 200 of their children in front of that invading army and either slits their throat, stabs them, bashes them in the head, or throws them all into a fire. This prolific account of human atrocity has always been here. It's one of the reasons why, like, when you read about why God destroyed the world, and he kind of says in Genesis, he's like, you know, I'm not going to do it again, at least not this way, not with flooding, but men's hearts are vile. They're filled with violence from the time that they're children. I mean, it's in these cultures that we've been reading about, that we've been talking about. It is literally part of their honor system to act this way. Tyre, additional evidence for this practice of child sacrifice by the Canaanites under siege is provided by another Roman historian, Quintus Curtius, also known as Rufus, in 50 AD. The city of Tyre was under siege by Alexander the Great. At first, the citizens hoped for assistance from the colonies in the west. When this failed to materialize, the leaders met to consider emergency measures. According to Rufus, he states that some proposed renewing a sacrifice, which had been discontinued for many years, of offering freeborn boys to Saturn, their god Saturn. This sacrifice, handed down from their founders, the Carthaginians, are said to be performed until the destruction of their city, and unless the elders had opposed it, the awful superstition would have prevailed over mercy. The Carthaginian practice of child sacrifice to relieve a siege was traced to the Phoenicians, the Canaanites, by the Phoenician historian Sanchuniatin, as transmitted by Philo of Byblos, and the, let me see, Porphyrius and the church father Eusebius. So a lot of men from the older time frame during the Roman era were around these cultures, documented these cultures, and kept meticulous notes and just updated throughout centuries these same atrocious acts. Like, I didn't add half of what I've researched into here just because it was gory. It was gory. I didn't want to research it. Well, I mean, I read it. I didn't want to add it in here. Now, according to this tradition, the Phoenicians, in circumstances of extreme duress, would sacrifice their beloved children to their highest god. The 8-volume history was repeatedly full of these stories. Now, the significance of this material for a proper understanding of the account of Mesha's child sacrifice in 2 Kings chapter 3 can hardly be exaggerated at this point. Indeed, the correspondence between the theory and presented in the different texts and practices recounted in biblical texts is nothing short of remarkable. We have, once again, the same circumstances. We have a city under siege, which is identical to what was happening with the Canaanites. And Mesha's sacrifice is one of the items mentioned in the prayer section that's recorded in history. And the withdrawal of the Israelites is uncannily presaged in the conclusion of the cuneiform tablet as well. So the Bible recorded these events thousands of years before the Romans recorded these events. Just think about that. And there's a lot more in here, so anyone who's going to be over on the Patreon channel, you'll be able to read all the rest of this. All right, hitting two more examples. Going back to 2 Kings in chapter 16, verses 1 to 4, we have King Ahaz of Judah who sacrificed his son in a pagan ritual. In the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, became king. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord his God, as his father ancestor David had done. Now, I want you to stop and think that not doing what's right in the sight of the Lord his God, as his father and ancestor David had done, literally is what was happening in all these other cultures that you've been hearing about through the rest of the entirety of the world. Only one nation had God. Only one nation had God. That's why Israel is so special and so important. And I still can't understand why the Israelis don't understand that. And they keep turning from God. So instead, he walked in the way of the idolatrous kings of Israel, and he even made his son pass through the fire as a human sacrifice in accordance with the repulsive and idolatrous practices of the pagan nations whom the Lord drove out before the Israelites. So you had Leviticus, which says no more human sacrifices. And then going back into a little bit further into 2 Kings, human sacrifices again. Then we have 2 Kings chapter 21, the wicked reigns of Manasseh and Amon, his son. King Manasseh rebuilt all the pagan altars that his father destroyed, and then sacrificed his son to Molech. Manasseh ruled longer than any other king of Israel. I believe it was 55 years that he ruled, and was the most malevolent of all the rulers. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 55 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hephzibah, whatever. He did great evil in the sight of the Lord in accordance with the idolatrous, repulsive acts of the pagan nations, whom the Lord dispossessed before the sons' descendants of Israel. For he rebuilt the high places for the worship of pagan gods, which his father Hezekiah had destroyed. And he set up altars for Baal and made an image of Ashereth, which is Ashereth was another one of these Egyptian Canaanite mixed type of goddesses, which was kind of like a earth god, or also considered the queen of heaven. The Ashereth poles, the oak poles. Once again, here we go with oak. All right. So in these areas, you would have these big poles where people would go and they would worship and do all different types of satanic crap too. Well, that's where Ashereth comes from. Just as Ahab, king of Israel, had done, and he worshiped all the starry host of heaven and served them. And he built pagan altars in the house, in the temple of the Lord, of which the Lord had said in Jerusalem, I will put my name, my presence. And he built altars for all the host of heaven in the two courtyards of the house of the Lord. He made his son pass through the fire and burned him as an offering to Moloch. He practiced witchcraft and divination and dealt with mediums and soothsayers. He did great evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. He made a carved image of the goddess Ashereth and set it up in the house temple, of which the Lord said to David and to his son Solomon, in this house and in Jerusalem, in the tribe of Judah, which I have chosen from all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. And I will not make the feet of Israel wander anymore from the land which I gave their fathers, if only they will be careful to act in accordance with everything that I commanded them, and with all the law that my servant Moses commanded them. But they did not listen. And Manasseh seduced them to do more evil than the nations whom the Lord destroyed before the sons, the descendants of Israel. I'll go ahead and start to wrap this up. And I've got some really good articles tied into King Ahaz that you guys will really like. Once again, once we're done with this, I'll go and post it into the Patreon chat group. The practice of child sacrifice, of human sacrifice, is not of God. God clearly states it throughout the Bible. Stop doing this. Don't do it. No more human sacrifice. Don't pass your children through the fires of Molech. But we keep doing it. Here in America, we do it. It's called abortion. And we're actually sacrificing children because there's still witchcraft, there's still covens, there's still all these horrific things that many of you guys have heard about. And that's just America. I mean, right now we're over 70 million children since the 70s. 70 million children killed in the womb. And you have the satanic temple who comes out and says, "Thank you for doing it. Thanks for keeping the doors open. Every time you do it, we consider it a sacrifice to Satan." So, there is no way, in my professional opinion, there's no way that you can call yourself a Christian and be yoked up with anything that supports that. Donald Trump supports that. If he didn't support it, it would behoove him to come right out and say it. But he didn't. Instead, he castigated the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, for being too harsh on abortion. Modern day human sacrifices are still happening all around the world. They're either committed by radical fundamentalists who still practice barbaric, arcane religious acts, or it's from occultic groups performing satanic ceremonies, or it's from dark and deeply disturbing medical practices like abortion or medical assisted self suicide. Some so called witch doctors and traditional healers continue to torture and kill children in a number of countries. Governments of those countries and the Human Rights Council itself need to pay close attention and act upon it. There's a website I'm not exactly fond of per se, per se, but I can't help but want to support, and it's the Humanist International. So the Humanist International has intervened at the Human Rights Council to highlight the continuing plight of children who are mutilated or sacrificed in the mistaken and horrific belief that the death of these children or the use of their body parts will enable magical rites or traditional medicine. Planned Parenthood. Does anyone remember 2016? Baby head soup. All the dismemberance of the bodies of children, and they were selling them around the world. In China, it's a form of a delicacy to eat an infant. I want to read to you something real quick before I let you go. These statements will highlight the related practice of accusing children of being witches and sacrificing them. But it's from the 40th session of the United Nations Human Rights Council from the 25th of February to the 22nd of March, 2019. Now, this is on a general debate on item 4. And this is from Elizabeth O'Casey. She writes, a few days ago, archaeologists working in Peru found evidence of the ritual sacrifice of around 140 children, which occurred in 1450. Scientists suggest that the Kimu civilization sacrificed the children in response to catastrophic weather. To most, the finding represents abhorrent acts from a time when people had little understanding of science and relying instead on superstition. Yet child sacrifice continues today. In Uganda, children disappear frequently, murdered, or mutilated by witch doctors as part of ceremonial rituals supposed to bring luck to those who pay for it. In Nigeria, some evangelical preachers encourage people to believe children are witches. Abuse, abandonment, and murder can follow. In South Africa, some traditional healers use the body parts of sacrificed children as ingredients in their medicines. Child sacrifice rituals can involve the cutting of or removal of body parts, faces, or genitals. These brutal acts are frequently done whilst the child is still alive, since there is a belief that the screams of a victim being attacked enhance the power of the body parts as does the innocence of the victim. Despite laws against child sacrifice, poor implementation, lack of education, and an absence of clear principles and priorities for the elimination of the horrific practice mean that there are many children who still suffer today. The practice of child sacrifice works in a diametric opposition to all understandings of human rights and our obligations to some of the most vulnerable in society. Not enough is being done. This council, in tandem with affected countries, has an obligation to combat it. One of the countries in Africa, they would specifically and purposely, they would track down any child that was albino and they would cannibalize them. Once again, to sit here and say that we live in this world where you can just go to church and sing your lolly dolly songs, say a couple of hymns and prayers, and then leave, and you're done being a Christian. If you don't know what to pray for the innocents around this world that are being hunted down and killed, and pray for their protection. It's happening every day. You've just sat through 2.5 hours of experience that is nonstop. It won't stop until Christ returns. This will not stop. There are elements of churches involved in human sacrifice, Christian churches, and human sacrifice, child sex slavery, human smuggling. All right. So it's throughout the religious world. It's involved in every major government, every major religion, every state in America literally has this happening in it. And it's one of the things that Russ Dizdar was talking about quite in depth in his book, The Black Awakening, which I'm very sorry to y'all that I haven't put out any new recordings. We're going to be working on those very shortly, most likely tomorrow, and try to, pump out the rest of this book. Just had to take a break for a bit. My allergies are just killing me right now. But righteous blood of Abel, when spilt by his brother Cain, cried out, and God said, I could hear it. That's just from Abel. You have an entire world soaked in the blood of the innocents. In America, our hands are just as bloody as anyone else. Personally, I don't think we're going to repent the way we should as a nation. And I don't think America is going to get spared. I don't believe it. Maybe I'm a pessimist. I'm a realist. You better make your house Nineveh. I plead to you to pray the protection of our Lord Jesus Christ over your family, over your home. Genesis 8, verse 21. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10 says, But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything done in it will be laid bare. So why is the definition changing? What's going to eventually happen, and this is just the way I think of it, why the earth will eventually be destroyed, is because the whole world is soaked in the blood of innocence. It has to be destroyed. I don't think that it could be left to be undone. That's why we're going to have a new heaven. Though judgment of sin and rescue of the elect are related here, all right? The events of the last day also differ from the flood, both in means of fire versus water and the final outcome. With Noah and his family, they got off the boat, new land. With us, there ain't no boat, ain't no new land. It's a new body and a new heaven with our Lord, our risen Savior. Thank you, everyone, for listening. It's tough to get through this. It's tough to read it. I'm an image person, so as I read, I imagine a lot of things. I see a lot of things. It's not easy listening to this, and this may not be for everybody, depending on where you're at spiritually in your walk. Understand the enemy. Understand that the enemy needs the blood of the innocents. So when you hear about these things happening in your hometown, when you get that Amber Alert on your phone, man, I can't help but just get worried. When you look at all the ritualistic dates of human sacrifice, child sacrifice, the satanic ritual abuse calendar, my wife and I have it. We'll make sure that we post it. Those are dates that we tend to try to take that day and stay up and watch that night. Of course, now It's either my wife or I. We're up until 3 or 4 in the morning every night. We keep watch all the time now. Such is our job now. But this calling, it's needed to stay up, to meditate on the word of God, to pray about anything that God puts in your heart and on your mind to pray about. But if you don't have nothing to pray about, because I know a lot of people like, I don't even know where to begin to pray. Pray for the innocents around this world. Pray for their protection. Pray for these little children. One of these days, the thing that a lot of these people don't seem to understand in the way that they have hurt the innocents is that they're going to meet Mr. Millstone, and they're going to wish they were drowning in the sea, because there will be no excuse when you see your God. It doesn't matter what God you believe in. When you see God and you don't see all the little pantheons of false gods around you, when you're at the Bema seat and you've got no excuse for your actions, no excuse for how many times God has put someone in your life, told you about Christ, but yet you still denied it, or how many times you tried through your own works to save yourself. Some of you are going to be horrifically surprised. Remember that hell is filled with a lot of people with good intentions and a lot of lukewarm Christians. Don't be them. Do not become a liability. Do not become a spiritual liability to your family, to yourself, to your community. Do not become a physical liability. Become an asset, not a liability. Accept Jesus. Pick up your cross and move forward. Join the shield wall. Love everybody. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Stay frosty.